Today, Donald Trump became the third president in history to be impeached. For more on this, it's time for a closer look. Well, here we are. President Trump has been impeached. You know, the serial racist criminal who's already cheated in one election, obstructed justice in the investigation of that election, used his office to enrich himself, solicited bribes, inflicted human rights abuses on migrant families, been accused of sexual assault, had 6 close associates indicted or jailed. Do you remember that guy? No, you know, the guy who almost definitely committed tax fraud, admitted he broke the law by misusing his personal charity to help his campaign, began his presidency by settling a fraud lawsuit over his scam university, orchestrated an extortion scheme to cheat in the 2020 election, tried to cover it up, got caught, obstructed Congress, directed an illegal scheme to pay hush money to cover up an affair, and drove his golf cart onto the green. Yeah, that guy. And yet, Republicans are still pretending to be surprised that there are people who take issue with President Trump. This is like one of those news stories where a guy gets arrested for being a serial killer for 40 years, and reporters go to his neighbors and ask, did you suspect anything? And they say, well, one time I saw him with a chainsaw wearing a hockey mask, but I just assumed he was a lumberjack who played in the NHL. Now, as we tape this, we're expecting the actual final vote to impeach Donald Trump to happen any minute now. I mean, like, right after we tape this. And because we're taping right before the vote, that means we don't have video of the actual moment Trump was impeached. So as a placeholder, we'd like to show you the second most embarrassing thing to happen to Donald Trump, this clip of him getting on Air Force One with toilet paper stuck to his shoe. Because, much like the toilet paper, impeachment will follow Trump wherever he goes. In fact, I hope they put the toilet paper in the Smithsonian next to the articles of impeachment. Now, after a series of procedural votes in the House this morning, there were hours of debate on the actual articles themselves. And to give you an idea of the contrast between the two sides, here's a sampling of some of the pro-impeachment speeches during the floor debate.
It is tragic that the president's reckless actions make impeachment necessary. He gave us no choice.
President Trump has demonstrated a clear pattern of wrongdoing.
No one in America could do what Donald Trump did and get away with it.
And it is our duty to impeach him.
No president may cheat the people by working with foreign governments to steal from us a free and fair election.
He solicited foreign interference before, he is doing it now, and he will do it again. The president is the smoking gun.
It's true. Trump broke the law in plain sight and admitted it. He is the smoking gun. It's like if the cop showed up to the crime scene and there was Trump holding a gun with his name on it and a piece of toilet paper on the ground with his shoe print. Now, compare those speeches presenting evidence of Trump's impeachable offenses to the whiny rambling of the Republicans.
I strongly oppose the articles before us today, and I hope that we will finally move past this nightmare.
The matter before the House today is based solely on a fundamental hatred of our president. It's a sham, a witch hunt, and is tantamount to a coup. He's rebuilding our military. He helped create the Space Force.
We tied up the Intelligence Committee. We tied up the Judiciary Committee. And, oh, by the way, the Ways and Means Committee had to give up their room. They couldn't even meet while you were doing all of this.
They want to take away my vote and throw it in the trash. They want to take away my president.
I believe the Democrats are tearing this country apart. They're tearing families apart.
First of all, it is rich to accuse Democrats of tearing families apart to defend a president who is literally tearing families apart. Second, they all sound like bratty teens yelling at their parents, "Stop coming in my room, you're tearing this family apart, I have to build my Lego Space Force." So the House passed 2 articles of impeachment against Trump, and if you ask me, he got off easy with only 2. Remember that dumb press conference Trump did before he was inaugurated where he lied and said he'd hand off control of his businesses to his weird gargoyle sons and stood next to stacks of folders full of business documents that turned out to be blank and then for some reason just wandered off the stage like a confused old man? Democrats should have done that, but with articles of impeachment. This folder is for soliciting bribes, this folder is for human rights abuses, and this folder is for the way Trump stands with his chest puffed out, you know? Like he's trying to get his hoverboard to go forward. Looks like he's waiting for someone to throw birdseed on the ground so he can peck at it. So Trump is now the 3rd president in history to be impeached. Now, obviously, he'll very likely be acquitted by the Republican Senate, but still, this judgment will follow his name in history forever. And as we all know, there's nothing Donald Trump cares about more than his name. He puts it on everything from his tower to his helicopter to his private jet. They're going to have to change the name from Trump to Impeachment Airlines. Okay, folks, we're going to fly you about halfway to your destination, and then another airline will have to take you the rest of the way. In fact, Trump cares so much about protecting his name and his place in history, which will be permanently marred by impeachment, that yesterday he sent what can only be described as a truly deranged 6-page letter to House Speaker Nancy Pelosi whining about impeachment. Before we get into the worst parts of the letter, just listen to how it starts. This is the first line. Dear Madam Speaker, I write to express my strongest and most powerful protest against the partisan impeachment crusade. All right, first of all, we've already seen your strongest and most powerful protests. All those times in the Oval Office where you scream like a lunatic. I mean, look at it. It looks like something your tour guide would tell you to stay away from during a boat ride through the Amazon River. But Trump's letter just gets crazier. Here's just a sampling of some of the most bad lines from this official document on White House letterhead. And just for fun, I'm going to read it like a cartoon villain. You have cheapened the importance of the very ugly word impeachment. You are declaring open war on American democracy. It is a terrible thing you are doing, but you will have to live with it, not I. You have developed a full-fledged case of what many in the media call Trump derangement, and sadly, you will never get over it. You are the ones bringing pain and suffering to our republic for your own selfish, personal, political, and partisan gain. Once the phone call was made public, your whole plot blew up. But that didn't stop you from continuing, and now I will twirl my mustache while I tie you to these railroad tracks. But my favorite line from Trump's insane letter is this: since the moment I won the election, the Democratic Party has been possessed by impeachment fever. Impeachment fever sounds like he's narrating an old newsreel about the Beatles landing in America. Impeachment fever is sweeping the nation. Look at the throngs of teenagers screaming as they greet the Fab Four: Pelosi, Schumer, Schiff, and don't forget the dumb one, Donald. Uh-oh, looks like he's having trouble with his umbrella again. But I think maybe the most insane line from Trump's letter was this: more due process was afforded to those accused in the Salem witch trials. That's right, Trump compared impeachment to the Salem witch trials, but hey, you know, at least they didn't compare it to the Bible. I mean, that would be insane. I mean, even Republicans aren't deranged enough to compare Trump to Jesus.
I want you to keep this in mind. When Jesus was falsely accused of treason, Pontius Pilate gave Jesus the opportunity to face his accusers. During that sham trial, Pontius Pilate afforded more rights to Jesus than the Democrats have afforded this president in this process.
Jesus. I mean that literally. They actually compared him to Jesus. These people are out of their minds. Soon they're going to start claiming they saw images of Trump appear in their food. It was a miracle. I saw Trump's face in a piece of toast. But Trump has also been complaining that Democrats are abusing the impeachment process as was laid out in the Constitution. And in particular, Trump has complained multiple times recently that impeachment is only supposed to be used sparingly and reserved for presidents who have committed even more crimes than he has.
It meant something. When you had serious high crimes and misdemeanors, when you had serious crimes, it's impeachment. That would happen every 50 years, every 40 years, every 100 years. This was a big deal.
I think it's a horrible thing to be using the tool of impeachment, which is supposed to be used in an emergency, and it would seem many, many, many years apart.
It's not supposed to be many, many years apart. Impeachment's not Halley's Comet. It's a fire truck. It shows up when there's a fire. You're not allowed to say, we can only use that hydrant once every 50 years. Sorry about your house. Trump also continued to put his Republican supporters in a bind by insisting that the phone call with the president of Ukraine was not just unimpeachable, but perfect, and he refused to take any responsibility at all for what was happening to him.
And Mr. President, do you take any responsibility for the fact that you're about to be impeached?
No, I don't take any, zero, to put it mildly. They took a perfect phone call that I had with the president of Ukraine, an absolutely perfect call. You know it, they all know it. Nothing was said wrong in that call.
No, we don't know that because it's not true. Trump's like a guy at a party telling you an embarrassing story who assumes the same thing has happened to you. The other night, I ate too much chili, got drunk, went to karaoke, puked, slipped on the puke, farted, and split my pants. You know, guys, you've all been there. We've all been there. Whenever Trump does this, he makes it impossible for even his staunchest allies to defend him. Just take GOP Congressman Doug Collins, who was asked during yesterday's impeachment hearing, was Trump's call perfect? And Collins instead of answering the simple question, spewed a bunch of incoherent nonsense until he just gave up.
Was the president's call with President Zelensky perfect, as the president has said, and was it appropriate for him to ask another country to investigate an American citizen?
There was nothing, I've said this before, there's nothing wrong with the call. And then when you look at it, and again, frankly, the problem we're having right now is exactly the last 15 minutes of this. Great oratory on a lot of things that mean nothing to this actual impeachment. I mean, we get down to the bottom line here, and I'm just leave it at that. Let him answer that question. I'll get back to it later, because everything that's been thrown out here is exactly what the problem we've had in the discussion. And this idea of throwing law and fact, we've disproven the facts. We've talked about the law wasn't broken. They didn't put it in the Constitution. So I can yell on both of them. I can talk about both of them. The problem we have here is this is the very problem we have. And I'll just address one thing before I let it back, or if you want me to switch right now, I will.
Oh my God, what are you talking about? He's like the worst taboo partner in history. You know, the guy who just keeps repeating the same words really fast, like it's gonna help. Okay, it's like, okay, you know how when there's nothing wrong, you know how like sometimes you're wrong, except it's not wrong? No, so there's nothing wrong. You know the opposite of wrong? You did nothing wrong. It's not wrong, there's nothing wrong. The answer was perfect. It was a perfect call. Like his fellow Republicans, Collins has also been complaining about the impeachment process itself. During both today's hearing and yesterday's hearing, he claimed Democrats were rushing the impeachment vote. But he kept repeating a bizarre analogy that was very hard to follow.
The clock and the calendar are terrible masters. They do not care about anything except getting the time done and the calendar fixed. They do not care about facts. They do not care about time. And one day, the clock and the calendar will hang along this body in a very detrimental way. The clock and the calendar are terrible masters. And the majority will own that problem today, because to the clock and the calendar, facts don't matter. The clock and the calendar are terrible masters, and they lead to awful results. And yes, there will be a day of reckoning. The calendar and the clock will continue. And so whatever you may gain will be short-lived, because the clock and the calendar also recognize common sense.
What does that mean? The clock and the calendar are terrible masters, but they also recognize common sense. That sounds like an English translation of a German fairy tale designed to make children work harder. It sounds like Werner Herzog narrating one of his documentaries. Nature has two primal forces, the clock and the calendar, and they are terrible masters, but they understand common sense, and you cannot outsmart them. If you befriend the clock, the calendar will kill you in your sleep. And the clock will laugh. Tick-tock, tick-tock. That is how a clock laughs. A clock is always laughing at you. So the president is an adult lunatic with a tenuous grasp on reality, propped up by a party and a right-wing media apparatus that lies and rambles nonsensically. In fact, the Republican contribution to the impeachment debate today was basically a competition to see who could be more sycophantic towards Trump. We've already had comparisons to the Salem witch trials and Jesus, and then at one point today, a GOP congressman literally asked for a moment of silence for the people who voted for Trump.
So I want to use my time to call on this chamber for members to rise and observe a moment of silent reflection. To give every member here the chance to pause for a moment and remember the voices of the 63 million American voters the Democrats today are wanting to silence.
All right, if the 63 million who voted for Trump get a moment of silence, can we also have a moment for the 66 million who voted against him to go, what the? What? Among the many important takeaways from today, there's one very simple one that everyone should remember, and it's this: impeachment is popular and Donald Trump is not. Consistently, in poll after poll, about half Americans say Trump should be impeached and removed from office. Even a Fox News poll found this week that 54% of Americans wanted Trump impeached. And that's Fox News, Trump's favorite channel. That would be like if the Game Show Network changed their slogan to OK Boomer. What all of this comes down to is pretty simple. Republicans believe that if you challenge their power, you are illegitimate. That's why they gerrymander, stack the courts, suppress votes, and cheat in elections. And that's why impeachment was necessary, because we live in a democracy. And Trump tried to corrupt that democracy by cheating, and now he's the third president ever to be impeached. History will remember this day, because if we've learned anything from Republicans, it's that Trump will not be able to run away from
the clock and the calendar.
Here's been a closer look.